Emotion. A response of the whole organism, involving physiological arousal, expressive behaviors, and conscious experience. James-Lange theory. The theory that our experience of emotion is our awareness of our physiological responses to emotion-arousing stimuli. Cannon-Barth theory. The theory that an emotion-arousing stimulus simultaneously triggers physiological responses and the subjective experience of emotion. Two-factor theory. The Schachter-Singer theory that to experience emotion one must be physically aroused and cognitively label the arousal. Polygraph. A machine, commonly used in attempts to detect lies, that measures several of the physiological responses accompanying emotion. Catharsis. Emotional release. In psychology, the catharsis hypothesis maintains that releasing aggressive energy relieves aggressive urges. Feel-good, do-good phenomenon. People's tendency to be helpful when already in a good mood. Subjective well-being. Self-perceived happiness or satisfaction with life, used along with measures of objective well-being to evaluate people's quality of life. Adaptation level phenomenon. Our tendency to form judgments relative to a neutral level defined by our prior experience. Relative deprivation. The perception that one is worse off relative to those with whom one compares oneself. Behavioral medicine. An interdisciplinary field that integrates behavioral and medical knowledge and applies that knowledge to health and disease. Health psychology. A subfield of psychology that provides psychology's contribution to behavioral medicine. Stress. The process by which we perceive and respond to certain events, called stressors, that we appraise as threatening or challenging. General adaptation syndrome. Selye's concept of the body's adaptive response to stress in 3 stages: alarm, resistance, exhaustion. Coronary heart disease. The clogging of the vessels that nourish the heart muscle, the leading cause of death in many developed countries. Type A. Friedman and Rosenman's term for competitive, hard-driving, impatient, verbally aggressive, and anger-prone people. Type B. Friedman and Rosenman's term for easygoing, relaxed people. Psychophysiological illness. literally, mind-body illness, any stress-related physical illness, such as hypertension and some headaches. Psychoneuroimmunology. The study of how psychological, neural, and endocrine processes together affect the immune system and resulting health. Lymphocytes. The two types of white blood cells that are part of the body's immune system, B lymphocytes, form in the bone marrow and release antibodies that fight bacterial infections. T lymphocytes form in the thymus or other lymphatic tissue and attack cancer cells, viruses, and foreign substances. Coping. Alleviating stress using emotional, cognitive, or behavioral methods. Problem-focused coping. Attempting to alleviate stress directly, by changing the stressor or the way we interact with that stressor. Emotion-focused coping. Attempting to alleviate stress by avoiding or ignoring a stressor and attending to emotional needs related to one's stress reaction. Aerobic exercise. Sustained exercise that increases heart and lung fitness may also alleviate depression and anxiety. Biofeedback. A system for electronically recording, amplifying, and feeding back information regarding a subtle physiological state, such as blood pressure or muscle tension. Complementary and alternative medicine. As yet unproven healthcare treatments intended to supplement or serve as alternatives to conventional medicine, and which typically are not widely taught in medical schools, used in hospitals, are reimbursed by insurance companies. When research shows a therapy to be safe and effective, it usually then becomes part of accepted medical practice. How does the cognitive component of emotion determine how intensely we experience an emotion? We must cognitively interpret an event to judge its seriousness. The physiological characteristics of bodily arousal on a roller coaster may be similar to what is experienced prior to a plane crash. Yet our emotional reaction would be quite different given the context of interpretation. What three methodologies are used to measure emotions? Researchers typically measure behavioral displays of emotion, collect self-reports of emotion, and conduct examinations of physiological reactions to emotion. Describe how skin conductance can be used to measure emotional arousal. Skin conductance are the electrical resistance of the skin reflects the level of perspiration that a person is experiencing. High conductance is associated with high emotional arousal. Describe the relationship between emotional expression and relationship quality. People who internalize their emotions and do not express them are likely to report problems with closeness and a decreased ability to form intimate relationships. Couples who talk about their emotions report a greater degree of happiness. Describe two of Cannon's criticisms of the James-Lange theory of emotion. Total separation of the visceral organs from the central nervous system does not alter emotional behavior. The viscera are insensitive structures that produce the same changes in different emotional states. Visceral changes are too slow to be the source of emotions. Describe Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory of emotion. While physiological arousal is a necessary factor for an emotion to occur, it is the cognitive interpretation of the emotion that provides a label for what we are feeling. Describe the facial feedback theory of emotion. Subjective experiences of emotion are influenced by sensory feedback from the activity of facial muscles. What research evidence suggests that all people, regardless of culture or country of origin, can effectively interpret basic emotions. Cross-cultural studies have investigated whether or not people can accurately interpret the meaning of facial expressions presented in photographs. Even people who have never seen a photograph could perform this task accurately. Describe three personality characteristics that happy people tend to share. Happy people are generally optimistic, outgoing, curious, goal-directed, and possess high self-esteem. Discuss whether or not emotional intensity is a stable trait and provide an explanation. Research indicates that this is a stable trait because it generalizes across different kinds of emotions. People who respond to positive events strongly also tend to react strongly to negative. Describe the general results of physiological experiments that investigated the emotional differences between ethnic groups in the United States. In most cases, no emotional differences were observed when physiological and behavior responses to stimuli were compared. Name a psychological factor that determines whether an event will initiate stress. Perception of threat triggers the emotional state we connect to stress, reflects our ability or inability to cope with a situation. Distinguish internal sources of pressure from external sources of pressure. Provide an example of each. Internal sources of pressure come from within us, such as setting high academic standards for ourselves. External pressures may come from a task or situation, such as performing for an audience or completing a test in an allotted amount of time. Define daily hassles and provide an example from your own experience. Daily hassles are the most familiar source of stress, everyday annoyances that leave us feeling upset. Example may include finding a parking space on a crowded campus or dealing with a talkative coworker when you are trying to complete work for an approaching deadline. Discuss 2 shortcomings of the social readjustment rating scale. Cannot be generalized to all populations. Caucasians and African Americans may rank life events differently. How can sociocultural conditions act as a source of stress? Living in an atmosphere of racism where members of minority groups receive the message that they are inferior is one such condition that is chronically stressful. Describe how the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal pathway works. When we are confronted with stressors, the hypothalamus alerts the pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormones, which in turn stimulates the adrenal glands to produce Describe Selye's theory of how humans respond to stress. Selye's general adaptation syndrome describes a 3-stage response to stress. We experience alarm where we become physically aroused as the body prepares to fight or flee. During resistance, the body attempts to stabilize functions. Lastly, exhaustion depletes the level of energy available to respond to the stressor. Describe Lazarus' cognitive mediational theory of emotions. According to Lazarus, there are 2 steps in experiencing stress. During the primary appraisal, we examine the stressor and determine its severity. During the secondary appraisal, we evaluate our resources and ability to cope with the stressor. Describe 2 attributes of a pessimistic explanatory style. Having gloomier appraisals, believing things will go wrong for them, likely to experience more stress than a person with a more optimistic explanatory style. What impact does social support have on stress reactions? Discuss the long-term effects of lashing out in response to stress. Lashing out can harm or destroy a person's social support network, thereby increasing the likelihood that stress-related problems like anxiety and depression will arise. Describe the interaction of psychological and physiological factors in producing coronary heart disease. Job stress, a psychological factor, may interact with physiological factors such as high cholesterol and obesity to increase the prevalence of coronary heart disease. When and for what purpose does cortisol produce inhibitory messages in the body? After stress has occurred for 30 minutes or more for the purpose of calming down an overstressed body. Describe the process of inoculation. Exposing oneself to small levels of stress in a controlled situation to improve performance in a more stressful situation that is not controlled. What brain structure may be damaged by continued biochemical arousal associated with post-traumatic stress disorders? Evidence suggests that the hippocampus may be damaged, thus locking in post-traumatic stress disorders. Identify 2 changes in bodily arousal that may accompany an emotion. Increased heart rate, body temperature, and respiration. Identify 2 ways in which emotion can be expressed, verbally or non-verbally. What component of the nervous system acts to return the body to a normal state following an intense physiological reaction to emotion? Parasympathetic nervous system. What phenomenon is described by the finding that people need to share emotionally intense experiences with others? Secondary social sharing. How is heart rate affected by the presentation of unpleasant stimuli? Heart rate declines. What action tendency evokes forgiveness and motivates reconciliation? Embarrassment. Who was the leading critic of the James-Lange theory of emotion? Canon. What types of stimuli did Lazarus use when studying emotional response? Stressful films. What type of smile only involves muscles around the mouth? Social. Why may emotional patterns be passed from one generation to the next? They play a role in survival. Define the concept of effective computing. The computer monitors the data collected by the emotion mouse and analyzes this data to infer the User's emotional state. If a computer can read a user's emotions, then a computer gains the potential capacity for adjusting to its user. A computer game can be made more or less challenging. When a child reaches 18 to 24 months of age, what cognitive milestone allows him or her to express envy and empathy? Objective self-awareness. Who coined the term limbic system? McLean. What term is used to describe the level of happiness people consistently return to during their lifetimes? Happiness set point. Identify the three components of attention to emotion. An individual's tendency to take notice of, value, and focus on his or her emotions and moods. Name two characteristics of someone in the overwhelmed cluster of emotion. Average emotional attention, high emotional intensity, and low emotional clarity. Describe characteristics of the masculine display rules of emotion. Positive emotions should be suppressed, whereas negative emotions are expressed. Identify two common characteristics of mania. State of euphoria, frenzied energy. Provide an example of a chronic stressor in your own life. Example must be long-term and lack a definite endpoint. Define pressure as a type of stress. We feel pressure when there are expectations to behave in a particular way. Describe two types of situations that may produce feelings of endangerment. Combat, natural disasters, life-threatening situations, etc. What score range on the social readjustment rating scale indicates mild stress? 200 to 299. Provide two examples of events that could lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. Violent assault, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, combat, etc. What glands does the hypothalamus use to influence bodily organs indirectly? Adrenal glands. What type of explanatory style is related to the belief that despite setbacks, things will improve? Optimistic. Name two common physiological effects individuals who use repressive coping often experience. High heart rates and high blood pressure. Define cognitive reappraisal. Finding a way to reinterpret the negative aspects of a situation so they are less upsetting. What bodily system identifies and destroys foreign invaders such as bacteria and viruses? Immune system. When a stressor is detected, the sympathetic nervous system releases which neurotransmitter? Norepinephrine. In what situation may norepinephrine improve immune function? When low levels of stress are present. How is eustress defined by modern psychologists? Optimal level of stress that promotes physical and psychological health.